So last week, I said The Mandalorian Chapter 17, The Apostate, felt a bit like a catch-up episode, making sure all fans of the show were on the same page, especially anyone who hadn't seen the Book of Boba Fett. It was good and had a lot of great character beats, but there weren't any huge developments in terms of plot. Chapter 18, titled The Mines of Mandalore, is the complete opposite. Throughout the episode, I was like, are we already doing this? This episode broke the mold of how a season of The Mandalorian usually goes, with Din quickly wrapping up his droid side quest to immediately run off to Mandalore. And as for big developments, I don't know that we can get much bigger than the reveal at the end. In the recap at the start of the episode, the armorer mentioned the Mythosaur, and I was like, no, we're not doing that in episode 2, are we? Well, yes, we are, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We start off on Tatooine during the celebration of Boonta Eve, with swoop bikes doing donuts and speeders, I guess, Tatooine drifting around Pelly's garage. I guessed last week she would be Din's first stop to find a discontinued memory chip, and it's not long before he arrives. What I did not guess was that he wouldn't spend more than 5 minutes solving his droid problem before heading off again. I thought we would spend an entire episode on Tatooine doing something for Pelly to get the memory chip, so the fact we're zipping right along to Mandalore was a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. That does raise some questions for last week's episode, like, why make such a big deal about needing IG-11 specifically if Din is gonna settle for R5-D4? No shade to R5, I love that little droid, but let's be honest, IG-11 would have been more capable. I guess this could show Din's desperation and rush to get to Mandalore at any cost, diving headfirst into danger he doesn't understand. I think the stuff with IG-11 last week also served as a good illustration of Din's growth surrounding droids, but I also don't think we're done with the search for a memory chip. That's too specific for it to just be completely dropped. Anyway, let's go to Mandalore. I loved the little moment of Din sharing the planet's history with Grogu and admitting that he's also never been there, calling it the homeworld of our people, including Grogu as a Mandalorian foundling. It's just nice. It's cool to see Din really settling into his role as a father. The first 2 seasons he fell in love with Grogu, but the mission was always to bring him to others of his kind. But now Grogu has decided for himself who he wants his kind to be. He's not going anywhere, so now Din is acting as not just a protector, but also a teacher. Back in Season 2, Boba Fett claimed the Empire turned Mandalore to glass, and now we get to see what he meant. The planet was once green and full of life, as Din said, but generations of war and specifically a battle with the ancient Jedi turned it into a desert. Then the Empire bombed it, turning all that sand to a green glass-like texture. I love all the spiky, crystal-looking formations, as if an explosion was frozen in time. R5 disappears as he gathers readings on the planet's atmosphere, so Din goes into a cave after him, finding the ruins of Mandalore's capital city, Sundari, which is just so cool to see in live action. I am such a sucker for seeing the ruins of a familiar location. Having visited Mandalore many times in the Clone Wars, seeing its cubist architecture, it's familiar enough in live action to satisfy the nerd in me, but also make me plenty sad to see what the Empire did to the city. Din doesn't get any time to take it all in because he's attacked by some creatures who are still surviving on the planet. He fights them with the Darksaber, and I like that we are reminded that the blade is heavy to him. It's not a natural weapon for him to wield, but he does well enough to defeat his attackers. After recovering R5, he sees that the atmosphere of Mandalore is breathable, so he and Grogu venture deeper into the ruins, seeking the mines beneath the Civic Center. They reach the former sewers of the city, which match their appearance in the Clone Wars when Maul and his faction of Death Watch led an assault on Sundari, which is just a nice touch. When they finally reach the mines, Din is once again immediately attacked by some big droid cyborg thing. I have no idea what it's meant to be, and I don't know that we're meant to know. I think it's just something that has survived on this ruined planet at a huge cost to itself. We can see it has an organic eye, so maybe this person was once a Mandalorian that lost all sense of his or her humanity. It seems to need to feed off of other organics to stay alive, pumping Din full of tubes, and its lair is littered with other Mandalorian helmets. It's a grim scene. Whatever that thing is, its story purpose is to separate Din from Grogu, leaving the child on his own to protect himself, to let the audience see how that training with Luke has paid off. And it turns out, he is pretty capable on his own. The escape from the mines feels like something out of an amusement park, zipping through the tunnels and flying up and out. It's a fun little sequence, and when he's confronted by one of those creatures that gave Din so much trouble earlier, Grogu confidently sits up and tosses it out of the cave with ease before flipping into the starfighter. He doesn't get all tuckered out like he used to, no need for a nap, he's got this. Last week, there was a lot of discussion about how long Grogu spent with Luke, but I like that no matter what the answer is, his training wasn't so much about learning new skills as much as it was confronting his past and his trauma and healing his connection to the Force, moving through the memories that held him back. Like Ahsoka said, he stopped using the Force for fear of discovery after Order 66. It was cool to see him doing flips and stuff with Luke, but the big breakthrough moment for Grogu was when he began to acknowledge his past. I like how well this lines up with the story of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, where Cal also has to heal his connection to the Force after years of hiding and guilt after the death of his master in Order 66. But back to the story at hand, when bo-katan sees the N1 arriving, I love that she gets off her butt specifically to, quote, get rid of him once and for all. But the second she realizes Din is in trouble, she is spurred into action. Bo-katan, you're such a softie deep down. But speaking of confronting a painful past, that's exactly what she has to do now. I love that we kind of get a repeat of the first half of the episode. Grogu gets Din's inexperienced, kind of romantic version of Mandalore's history, and then Grogu comes back with bo-katan, and she gets to tell him what she experienced while she's looking at Sundari, probably feeling some guilt for the death and destruction she feels like she brought down on her people. Then she's standing in the city itself, giving Grogu and the audience a history lesson, but obviously feeling pain being back there. I said I was sad to see Sundari in ruins, and it's all made up and in space to me, but it's real to her. So much of the rest of this episode is bo-katan confronting her greatest failures to come out stronger on the other side. This is how she goes from sitting alone and depressed on her throne to being a Mandalorian again, a warrior. Her fight with the creepy cyborg thing is awesome, and just to prove that she is really back, she picks up the darksaber and wields it with ease. It's not heavy to her at all. In the thick of battle, there's no worrying about the so-called rules, no thoughts about whether or not it needs to be won in combat in order to be used. She sees it, she fights with it, and she kicks ass with it. She saves Din, and he insists that he's going into the mines to find redemption, and she makes fun of him for believing in children's stories. But she also seems to have some superstitions regarding the darksaber. She believes she needs it to lead, she believes it needs to be won in combat for it to hold any real symbolic power, but I think she just proved that's not the case. So much so that I honestly had a physical reaction to Din picking it back up for himself. I have been very vocal about my thoughts that this story would be about Din going from lowly bounty hunter to leader of Mandalore. But just a couple of scenes with bo-katan has me changing my tune, and now I'm rooting for her. I'm rooting for both of them, truth be told, but right now I think I'm rooting for her more. Despite calling his quest foolish, bo-katan agrees to help Din reach the living waters beneath the city, and along the way she says that seeing Mandalorians fighting one another pains her more than seeing Sundari in ruins, and this scene brings a lot of the episode together in a nice way. In the previous scene, she made Din a cup of something called pog soup, which he had never eaten. Bo-katan laughs because it was an essential part of her life as a Mandalorian, and meanwhile, Mr. If you take your helmet off you're not a Mandalorian over here has never even heard of it. Even earlier in the episode, she took some time to relate to Grogu about the Jedi. Din was taught that they were a group of enemy sorcerers, but bo-katan fought alongside Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ahsoka Tano, Kanan Jarrus, and Ezra Bridger. The Jedi were once the greatest enemies of Mandalore, but by the end of the Clone Wars, multiple members of the planet's royal house called them allies. They set aside their differences and they worked together. Unfortunately, Mandalorian history is not one of cooperation. Their past is full of separate factions and infighting. Bo-katan was even part of that problem, which I'm sure she is thinking about now. She was part of Death Watch. She fought against her own sister's attempts to bring peace to their people. Bo-katan eventually realized she was wrong, but then she was fighting against Mandalorians that sided with Maul, and then she fought against Mandalorians that sided with the Empire, and by the time she finally brought some unity to her people, people, they weren't as strong as they should have been. The greatest warriors in the galaxy are always so busy fighting one another that they make it easy for some outside group to swoop in and beat them. Bo-Katan wants her people to set aside their differences, and I think that's a major theme of this series. Whether it's different sects of a culture, or a religion, or even a fandom, it's pointless to get bogged down in the details of what make us different from one another when there's so much more that can unite us. We can share our differences with one another and offer new perspectives. Bo-Katan kind of teases Din about the Pog Soup, but she does not say, "Oh, you weren't a Mandalorian before you had Pog Soup, but now you are." She gives him a new experience that was a big part of her life and expanded his own understanding of his own culture, all while he sets foot on his homeworld for the very first time. This all reminds me of the Clone Wars message, embrace others for their differences, for that makes you whole. Mandalorians need to do exactly that. As the episode continues on, Bo-Katan does try to find some common ground with Din. She tells him that she also visited the Living Waters, and she also took the Creed. It was all theater according to her, but still, it's such an interesting scene as they move past their differences and discuss their shared experiences and bond over Bo-Katan's father, who I was intrigued to learn more about. This is the farthest back into her history that we have ever been, and the more I hear, the more I lean forward. She is such a great character, a princess of royalty who went off and joined a militant group against her own sister, the Duchess. What drove her to do that? I have some headcanon involving just wanting to rebel against her upbringing and her goody two-shoes sibling that went too far, but I would love to hear the tale in full, maybe in a book someday. I love the arrival into the Living Waters and Bo-Katan's sarcastic reading of their origins and the myth of Mandalore the Great and the mythosaur that once lived there. She has taken Din here, but still thinks it's all foolish. But he is just enthralled. This scene is great because even though I have been hoping for Din to move beyond his zealous attachments to old rules and traditions, I was happy for him. He reached his goal. I might not agree with all of his motivations, but I respect Din, and this is a powerful moment for the character, so it became a powerful moment for me too. Even Bo-Katan is taken in by his reciting of the Creed. I've been hard on the Children of the Watch and how they cling to the old ways at the expense of everything else. I don't regret that, I still think that's the case, but I never want to make it sound like there's no place for traditions or symbols. Something like the Darksaber, for example, does have power as a symbol. It is a symbol of unity. A Mandalorian named Tar Vizsla became a Jedi. He joined the ranks of the enemy as one of their own and literally forged his own unique path forward. In Star Wars Rebels, we learn that it has the power to unite Mandalore. That's great, but then all of a sudden we also see that some Mandalorians think it only works if it's won in combat. Why? Some people care more about the supposed rules surrounding a symbol than its actual meaning, and I think that's the trap the Children of the Watch have fallen into. Laws and traditions and symbols are all well and good, but they need to be able to change and adapt and be updated. But what about a symbol that's so ancient and so mythical that there are no rules surrounding it? What then? As Din wades into the Living Waters, something drags him under. Bo-Katan dives in after him, finds him deep down at the bottom, and on her way out, she sees a mythosaur. Holy crap, this series has continued to do things that I just never thought I would get to see on my screen as a Star Wars fan. I've seen pictures of Mandalorians and mythosaurs before, but not like this. And the fact that this happened in the second episode of the season, and did Din even see it? What does this mean? Where do we go from here? What do I do now? How do I go on living my life as normal after seeing this? It's so cool. This could be a moment of renewed faith and hope for Bo-Katan, and I think we are building to Din eventually taming and riding the beast. It feels like the natural progression from Kuiil teasing him about the mythosaurs when he struggled to ride a blurg. Also, it's a good way to one-up Boba Fett. Oh, you rode a Rancor? That's cute. Meet my mythosaur. And ultimately, I do still think this story is about Din rising to take on the mantle of Mandalore. I also have a feeling the Armorer is still gonna be mad at him. Like, he might return to her and say he bathed in the Living Waters and she won't care. Hopefully that'll be a wake-up call, and then he can just go back to Mandalore and ride a mythosaur, because in Din's mind he'll be like, that'll show her what a real leader is. But then again, I wonder if that title of Mandalore is something something else that needs to fade away. Bo-Katan wants Mandalorians to unite, but rather than following the person who wields the darksaber or rides the mythosaur, wouldn't a true sense of unity come from sharing those symbols of power? Maybe this is me coping with wanting both Din and Bo-Katan to have the darksaber, but what if they simply shared it? What if there is a scene later on where Din, the foundling, Bo-Katan, the heiress, and Boba Fett, the clone, all fought side by side, and they all wielded the darksaber, tossing it back and forth. 3 people, each with a very different perspective on what it means to be a Mandalorian, all cooperating and agreeing that these symbols can be for everyone. That's just an image that popped into my head that I liked, but the truth is, this story can go so many different ways, and just about every option I think of sounds cool to me. I cannot wait to see what Chapter 19 has in store, but that's all I have to say about this week. Let me know what you thought of the Mines of Mandalore in the comments. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel to keep up with all our episode reviews and Mandalorian Season 3 coverage, and come back tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern for our live after show where we'll be discussing the episode with our guest, Tony Thaxton. Follow us on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram, and consider checking out our Patreon page, where we're releasing our video reactions and audio commentaries for every new episode. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.